I'm hoping is that this might inspire those of you that haven't exhibited before to actually take this on. It's not as ominous a task as it sometimes seems. I used to go to stamp shows when I was younger, and you would see these 8-frame exhibits of, beautiful Victorian stamps, and I just thought I could never ever be in that class, and there's no point in even trying. I think the APS and other societies that are trying to promote exhibiting have loosened the rules to the point where now I feel like, I felt like it was worth my while to get it going. So some of the things that they did were they increased the number of different classes of exhibits that you can actually exhibit on, from just a standard exhibit, which would be one particular stamp issue where you've got the proofs and the pre-material, then the actual stamp itself, and then the uses of the stamp. That's a pretty standard exhibit. Up to now, as you'll see in a minute, there's probably 13 different classes of exhibits. The other thing that I learned is that you don't have to do this in a competitive sense if you don't want to. You can, you can exhibit just for fun. You can put it in a non-competitive class. What I found is that I find it fun just to exhibit. I don't get caught up in the competition part of it. What I do is I like getting caught up.
Sorry, yeah, a little bit closer to the speaker.
Okay, so what I like is getting caught up in telling the story, and that's I think has transformed me from just being a stamp collector as I was up 15 years ago to being sort of a collector of stories, and the story is really not that much fun unless you can tell it to somebody. And so that's kind of why I got interested in these new sort of forms of exhibiting. So my very first exhibit was back in 2017. I exhibited at the Walplex show, which is a sort of local club, and for that it was just a participation. There was no sort of judging or anything like that. And then I exhibited at the Philatelic show. Philatelic show in 2017, 2018, I forget exactly when. I just put it into the competitive class, and I got back a grade, a score, and a critique. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that process, and maybe some of you feel like this is something that you want to do yourselves. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So, that's how can I help gin up enthusiasm? I'm sure that many of the people on this call are way more expert than I am on this particular topic. I'm definitely not an expert. I'm really just enthusiastic about doing this and telling the stories. I want you guys to know that I started this process from scratch. I didn't buy an exhibit and then make it look better. It was purely something that interested me. I learned how to put it together into a small exhibit, and then I entered it into competitions. So just so you know, my first exhibit, silver bronze. My second exhibit, silver. So maybe I'm sort of inching my way up the top, but it's never my goal to win big awards and get the big prizes. Probably the most fun that I had with this exhibit was I think the Spelman had a chance for members just to put the exhibits up, and I went there one evening. There were people standing at my exhibit, and I talked to them about my exhibit. It was fun. I mean, just like because it's not really about the stamps for everybody. It's often about the topic. So key to this is this whole process is that I've borrowed heavily from this APS manual, Philatelic judging and exhibiting. It's a free download. You can just get it from the APS site, and it's a guide. It tells you a lot about what's out there, from how to, well, not necessarily how to get started, but how you're going to be judged if you enter your exhibit in a competition. And so there are all these points. We'll talk a little bit about what these points are. I'm not going to go into too much detail. This is something that you guys, when you get in the weeds can worry about how you're going to get more points if that's something that really is important to you. But you'll see in a minute that there are multiple categories that you judge from, and only one of them is presentation. So presentation is probably about 5% of the score, so it's not very big, but I like to spend some time on the presentation. Probably the most, the biggest score driving things are things like rarity, scarcity, individual research. And if you've actually found a new route and you can document it with mail, or we've found a new variety of a stamp and you can document how the printing process led to that, that's original research that counts quite heavily. In my cases, I usually pick a topic that's something that I've been excited about for years. In this particular case, it was just about my fascination with a father-son team that broke the world land speed record and the world war speed record multiple times in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And so I've always had that fascination with these guys that went, took these massive cars inside, the length of this room, when people were driving little Model Ts and they were racing them on beaches, at 300 miles an hour. And I just marvel at how, the sort of courage of these guys. So basically, what I tried to put together here was a collection of philatelic items that were in that public area. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but this was my sort of prime piece. It's basically a cover from one of the trials that one of these racers, when he was racing on Daytona Beach, he broke the world land speed record and then he signed the cover. So this was kind of a cool piece for me to open up. Next slide, please. Yeah. So first of all, so what is an exhibit?
Hey, Frank. I got a work fire. I have a work fire.
Okay. Okay, so I can just push.
Yep, just tap in that corner.
Okay. So what is an exhibit? Well, I mean, it looks something like this. This is an A-frame, and in this A-frame, the space was 16 8 by 11 pages. If you have what's called a one-frame exhibit, then you'll just have 16 pages for your entire exhibit. If you have a multi-frame exhibit, it's going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think there's a limit, maybe 10 is the limit of the number of frames. So basically, it's a it's a display of philatelic and non-philatelic material that's linked together by a narrative to communicate a subject chosen by the exhibitor. This definition is what turned me back into basically wanting to present some of the material that I had, because this term non-philatelic allowed me to include in that exhibit some other pieces that I'd already collected along the way that may not be covers and stamps, but maybe things that are sort of related, like an autograph or a medal, something like that I had already had in my collection. So it's generally shown at a philatelic show in a competition, but doesn't have to be in the competition. It just has to be something that that is shown to the public, and it's usually in one of these frames. So this would be a one frame. Frame is about the width of this TV screen, maybe sort of on that side, down to about here, and it fits 16 pages. All right, so this does take a little bit of forethought. It took me probably 6 months of putting these things together. I first showed it in October, then I showed it at the Philatelic show in May. And generally the thought is sort of outlined here. And I'm going to talk about each of these in a separate slide. Now, the key thing is, what is your area, or what is your topic? What is it that you want to present on? And sometimes you already have the material, something that you've been passionate about, you've been collecting on for years. So then the question is, how do you organize that into a story that is going to be told? And you'll see in a minute that for all exhibits, the judges are expecting a story. It's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That beginning could be, like I say, the proofs of an issue. And in the middle would be the actual stamps, and then the end would be an actual use of the stamp, and maybe the next year's issue that kind of supersedes it. So there's sort of the beginning, middle, and end. You have to obviously look out for new material. Learning the rules and the ropes. I don't think it's too onerous to learn these rules and ropes. What I've kind of gathered along the way is that almost anything goes, but you are not going to get the best score in the sort of judging sense if you don't follow at least some of the recommendations. And so there are, in terms of ropes, there are materials and techniques that you have to sort of learn that are too hard. In terms of learning the rules, they're the manuals, the APS manual that I just mentioned. You have to think a little bit about what category you're going to be exhibiting in and what the format is that you're going to use. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then, just so you know, you're not, there are resources available to first-time exhibitors. And in fact, before I exhibited, I went to view exhibits, and I went to a workshop that was put on by an organization called the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors. So really, there is an organization that helps with this process. And I just listened to people talking about their exhibits and what was expected, and then I got started. Let's see if I get to the next slide. Is that working? Nope. Okay. So shown here on the right are the different classes now of exhibits that you can enter in a competition. I went with this one called display, which I'll tell you about in a minute, but you can see that there are, advertising, patriotic event cover exhibits. There's Philatelic, Philatelic, Cinderella's, experimental, birthday covers, revenues, whatever it is that you feel like your topic best fits, you can find a category that you would be exhibiting under. So I know that when we talked a few months ago, maybe some of you were interested in topical or thematic exhibits. There are different rules that make something topical versus something thematic, and you can go read about that in the APS manual. And then there's obviously the traditional exhibit, which is what I mentioned to you earlier, that maybe one stamp issue from beginning to its uses to the end. Generally, exhibits are multi-frame, but this new category of one-frame exhibits came about maybe, George, you can tell me, like 20 years ago, something like that. Personally, I think it's opened the doors, certainly opened the door for me, because I didn't feel like I had to put together something that was massive and exhaustive, which was just, I thought about how was I going to fill 16 pages, which didn't seem too daunting. So one frame is just 16 pages. It's just a regular page that you would get out of your printer. And the reason why I picked display was because you can find a definition of all of these in the manual, but I picked display because it allows you to combine philatelic material and non-philatelic material, as long as the philatelic material is the major component of the exhibit. So I can see, for example, in your case, you had some wonderful postcards, you had some brochures, you had a whole bunch of things that, in addition to covers and stamps that you could include in the exhibit that includes multiple different things. So I'm going to just run through my exhibit, which, like I said, did not win any awards. Please don't take this as an example of an excellent exhibit, but just to point out what I did, including many different pieces in the exhibit. Okay, so I'm not too sure why I'm not seeing my presentation. The presentation has gone away from the screen here. Hold on a minute. Let's see. Can I do it like this, maybe? Do you see the mouse? Do you see the mouse anywhere over here? There's the mouse. Okay, there's the mouse. All right, so let's see. Sorry about this. Okay, there we go. So in the so just if you were to go to the American Association for Philatelic Exhibiting website, you can get examples of great exhibits that they've published. I'll show you some resources that exist later. But this is just one that they have, which is called How to Build a Philatelic Exhibit. So you can actually read about all the different pieces that you might want to put into your exhibit. So they have an exhibit on building an exhibit. But I just wanted to point out that it is still it's one frame that's sort of 16 pages, which is not too daunting. So just thinking about what's your area or your topic, organizing your thoughts. I can tell you what drove me. I think I mentioned this earlier, but it's usually something that is of interest to me. And when I thought about what I might want to exhibit on, I have a Word document that has different areas that I feel like I can put together an exhibit. I'm on my third exhibit now. The one I'm just pointing out today was my very first exhibit. So usually I'm just thinking, what do I have? What would I like to have? How would I like to tell a story about something that interests me? So it's usually something that interests me. It's almost always something that's not too expensive or too expansive. I mean, like I mentioned, I don't want to be having to find really rare material, spend thousands of dollars on it. It's usually something that's fun, and my wife's not going to kill me for putting it together. So,
It's not a full page of Penny Black. So.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the one exhibit at the 2016. I mean, they showed the trees getting like yellow color. I mean, like that is not my exhibit, right? So, yeah, so it's usually just something that's fun, and in fact, part of the hard part, when you're thinking about this, is sometimes cutting down from the material that you've got in order to sort of make a story. So you may have way too many pieces that all illustrate one thing, maybe, but because the story might not be about the postmarks or the color of the cachet, but rather it's about some different amenity, which of the pieces is going to best fit in your exhibit. Yeah, so then, you have to start collecting the material, or at least organizing the material and thinking about the exhibit story in mind. So what's the beginning, what's the middle, what's the end? So I'll show you how I did it. Now, I didn't get criticized for this part of it, though. We never criticized for the story part of it. I was really criticized for the lack of original research and some lack of scarcity and things like that. But I'll just point out what I did. And then you need to think about what kind of items you're going to display. So if it is a display like I picked, are you going to show matchbook covers or coins or picture postcards, things that maybe aren't considered purely philatelic, and how are they going to add to your story? And then if you are really going to get into the competitive nature of this, how do you fulfill the scoring criteria? So we'll talk about that in a minute. But how are you going to best maximize the 20 points that you get for original research? So you need to think about some ways that you can show that in your exhibit. I have never, at this point, focused so much on that particular issue, but clearly it's important. And then, of course, you need to prepare. So take your materials, sort it. Sometimes I lay it out in stock books so that I can see what the 16 pages might look like. You need to go on this net, go all my things through eBay, and just obtain the mounting supplies. They're not difficult in crafting supplies, things that you might mount a photograph with, or things you can mount your collection with. Could you just go to the next slide, please? All right, so here I just very quickly, it's from the APS manual of philatelic judging and exhibiting. These are the different categories of medals that you can win. This is obviously the best. People that win this go on to the Champion of Champions type exhibits. So very, amazing exhibits and definitely worth going and visiting them. So I've been around here in my exhibits. So, treatment, importance, knowledge, research, rarity, condition, presentation. Those are those are the different categories that make up the 100 points. And if you're in the silver range, you're getting, you know, like about 2/3 of the points for each one of these categories. But at something like the Philatelic show, there will be a few of these. There'll be a few of these, but you know, there are a fair number of these. So you're not going to feel like you're like a dog in the pony show, right? I mean, it's fine to be even down in the certificate level. I don't think anybody discourages people from just being there and presenting. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the manual. It was revised in 2019. It keeps getting revised. You know, whenever there's a revision, I usually go and look at it, what new categories there that might fit me. But this category is called experimental, which means it's even more than display. Display is Philatelic plus other things. Experimental is like, what do you want to, you know, blow our minds in this one? I mean, people put video screens. They have little trays beneath with toys, or you know, you can add other stuff to your exhibit. There are obviously books, and in fact, I brought one of the books. You know, if you do get to the point where you want to do this, there are books you can buy. I'm happy to lend this to anybody that wants to look. There are a lot of free materials at the AAPE site, at the APS site. There are actually exhibits online and at a number of different websites. So you can go and see what other people have done. I mentioned thinking about the category and the format. You know, you might want to sit with your collection and say, how would this best fit one of these categories, and then go with it. Some of the categories are a little strict for my liking, so just be aware. If you go for error philately, you know, make sure everything is something to do with error philately. There's, you know, it is pretty strict. And then, you know, we'll talk a little bit about the materials and the techniques in the next slide. Okay, so, you know, I learned a lot from just going to exhibits. So this is what a typical exhibit looks like. If you haven't been to a show, this is not from our, you know, from any show around here. This, I just downloaded from the internet. That's the Sarasota show in Florida. But, you know, this is not unlike what you'll see at the Philatelic show in May. These A-frames with 16 pages per frame, and then, you know, you can walk down and look at them. If you go on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday morning, you'll see the actual awards, the little pins that will be pinned to each display, and then you can know which ones got the big awards, and you can spend looking at the ones that do well. And in fact, on Saturday afternoon at that show, there'll be a judge's critique, and you can go sit in on that if you want to just learn what the judges are saying about each exhibit. So the judges will give public feedback to each exhibitor that's in the room. So it's not that they give public feedback about every exhibit. If the person's not in the room, they're not going to talk about the exhibit, but they might say, "There's Frank Slack here," and if I'm there, they'll say, "Oh, Frank, we want to give you some critique about your exhibit," and it's also written out, so you can improve your exhibit the next time if you wish. This is the next one that's happening. If you're not going to the Philatelic show, you should. There's going to be, you can already go on the website and see that there are an amazing collection of exhibits. We're going to have at least this number of exhibits at the show, so it should be fun. Next slide, please. Okay, so just in terms of learning, I learned a lot from the AAPE. It's not too expensive to join. I think it's like $30 a year, and they have a journal that they mail to you. They also have some services that I'll show you in the next slide that can be very helpful in helping you get started or giving you positive feedback on your exhibit. So the next slide. You can see that in fact they have links, like here's one, getting started, how to do a first day cover exhibit, how to produce an exhibit page. They even have some templates in Word that you can get started with if you use Publisher, for example. And this one is actually the exhibit about making exhibits, and you can see what they said. The other thing that they have is they have a critique service. So you are, for a very low amount of money, I think like $10, you can send them a photocopy of your exhibit, or you can send them just your title and synopsis page. I'll tell you about what those are in a minute. And they'll give you some feedback about it, even before you get out into the wild with your exhibit. So a real judge will actually judge it behind the scenes and give you a critique, and you can improve your exhibit before you go public with it. All right, next slide. Okay, so yeah, so this part of getting started in mounting was actually a little daunting for me because there are a lot of resources out there about how to do this, but I thought when I was getting started that it wasn't really set up for somebody with a laser printer and it seemed that there were more articles on how to lay it out and write out your exhibit, things like that. But these days, you can do it all on a laser printer. You can do it all with Word. You can do it with just a limited number of supplies. In fact, when I was putting my exhibit together now for the first lecture, this is essentially what I used. I have show guard mounts, which are clear mounts or black back mounts, depending on what you want. You can put your items in there. You look on the back, you stick it onto the page. I lay it all out on 8.5 by 11-inch paper that I test drive just on thin paper in Word. And then when I've got that laid out and I put every piece on there just to make sure it all fits, then I print it out on 67-pound paper, which is a little bit thicker. It's not quite, it's not cardboard, but it's also not sort of all that floppy, so that it just sort of protects the pages from flopping over when you're carrying them. I have these sort of mounts, these two different mounts that you can get on the internet. They just sort of photo mounts and slightly bigger plastic mounts that you might cover or postcards or something like that. And then I have a guillotine, which is not very expensive, but that I use to cut these mounts into the right sizes. And then I have on the next page I have the actual sort of plastic protective covers that I'll put every page into once it's been printed. So on the next slide, you can get these just from like Amos. These are basically protective sleeves made of acid-free polyester, archival grade stuff. And actually that paper that I showed you on the previous slide, I can go back when this from I think it's like the company is Neiman. It's also acid-free archival paper, so it's not going to degrade your items over time. Okay, next slide, please.
Next.
Yeah, so basically you can leave your exhibit in these exhibit pages and actually mount them, in these sleeves and mount them directly into the frames. And then you can store your exhibit like this if you wanted to.
Can I ask a question? That was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask. Do you break down your exhibits afterwards, or do you leave?
I mean, I've left them as exhibits. I've never actually broken them down. One reason is because sometimes I get an opportunity to sort of quickly go show it somewhere else, and I can just read them there if I need to. Yeah.
So do you put on sheet cardboard and then stick it into the A-frame?
No, you need to put it onto the pages, and then the A-frame is going to have place for 4 pages in a row. You're going to have to mount those yourself, but it's not tricky. There's it's not like there's glue or anything involved. It's usually just a little what do you call it, like a little tray that the paper fits into, and then it falls against the frame. So it's pretty simple. You just keep it in these exhibit sleeves, so it's not going to get damaged in any way.
I didn't know about those because I was using the page protectors basically, but they're 3-ring binder punched,
Yeah,
which makes them a little.
I started with that, and I still have one of my exhibits sitting in Staples page protector.
Exactly what they are.
But this stuff now became readily available through Amos. This used to have to write a letter to the company, and they would send it to you. Now it's just available.
They're online like everybody else.
Yeah, so these are sort of like the best, and they're not all that expensive. They come in 2 sizes. So what I mentioned to you was there's the single page size, but some people have started to print exhibits in sort of 2-page format. If you have a long cover, for example, and it won't fit on 1 page, you can put it over 2 pages. You can protect it with a double size. Yeah, you need to have a special printer that can print the large size pages, but I'll show you in my first exhibit, I didn't have the luxury of that. And I put my colors like this. You just have to sort of wangle it. All right, next. And then I think maybe I can start.
Why is that not moving? Because I moved the mouse, that's why.
All right, so I'm just going to run through my 16 pages, not to stop at every page and sort of talk about it in any detail, just to give you a sense of what I did. There are a few things that you'll need if you're going to competitively exhibit. In fact, if you're going to enter into any stamp show, you need to have a synopsis page that doesn't get seen by anybody except the judges. So the synopsis page helps them prepare for judging your exhibit.
And that's submitted ahead of time?
Yes, this gets submitted with your check.
Got it.
And your entrance form. And what I haven't shown here, to look at cutoff, is that you also want to put down at the bottom. You would want to put down some sort of reference material, in particular if you used a particular encyclopedia or a particular website, and you want the judges to be able to find that so they can teach themselves about what you're doing. You want to also show something there about how they can find information about your exhibit. So the AAP recommends that you have these 5 categories. What's the purpose of the exhibit? And so you want to talk about, it's a 1-frame display or it's a 6-frame traditional exhibit, and then a little bit about what its story is. What's the scope? So what are you covering? You can only be judged on what you say you're covering. So if you say I'm covering the penny black from its inception to when the penny red came out, they're not going to take off points because you don't have a penny red. You just have to tell them what the scope is. So in my case, my scope was the times that this father-son team raced in the US. My exhibit was called Bluebirds in America because all their cars and boats were called Bluebirds. So a little bit of, it was kind of a dumb title in the end. I thought I was being a little cute. I think the judges would prefer me to say something like, fast cars in the early age of the world speed record or something like that. So then, so something about rarity, I didn't have much rarity. I mean, I just had one color signed by this guy. That was the day that he actually broke the record. Condition, and challenge. So how hard was it to find the materials? And in my case, it wasn't particularly hard. Almost all these materials I had bought at shows or I bought over the internet. You can talk about how difficult it is to find someone why they might not be in your collection. Like, for example, if you're going for early Mauritius, you can say, I don't have post office Mauritius 1p or 2p because there are only 10 of them in the world, whatever. So you can talk about why they may not be in your collection. And then the presentation, sort of how are you displaying this? Is it in chronological order or what's the story pretty much? Next slide. Yeah, so basically the very first page of the exhibit is going to be what's called a title page. And so in a title page, essentially it has a little bit about what you're presenting, so a little bit about the scope and the presentation. It's going to have a plan. So what would the people be able to see? A little bit like an index of a book. For example, if they went to page 8 of the exhibit, what are they going to find? And then typically it would have one sort of display item. And it's best if the display item is related to the topic.
Is the code something they're requiring now or just something you added? The QR code?
No, that's something I added. So,
okay.
So if you go and click on that QR code, it takes you to the video of this race. When he was zooming down Daytona Beach. Yeah, so you can include
I
all
like
that
it.
stuff. When I initially thought about this, I thought I'm putting an iPad here that would be constantly running this video, which is, I mean, unbelievable video to think this guy raced Daytona Beach in a massive car going 250 miles an hour. But there's a video of it. And then I made a few mistakes, which were pointed out, and I will point them out to you now. Don't, or try to avoid doing it. If you have an original piece, rather show the original piece rather than a scan of it. So in this case, I actually had a black and white version of this photo, but I was able to find on the internet a colorized version, which I thought was kind of cool. So I showed the colorized version that you want to show original material as much as you can. This just shows you that some of the parts of my exhibit are not philatelic. This is an example of a cigarette card that shows this particular driver, and it's one of the sort of non-philatelic items that I included. Some things that I learned from the critique was that even for the non-philatelic pieces, the judges want to know a little bit more about it. Like which brand, when, maybe who published it. So a little bit more about the background, and I'll show you in the next slide when I think I have some postcards. Like for example, this postcard over here is a beautiful postcard. It basically shows the history of the cars that this guy drove from 1920 to 1935. It's signed by his granddaughter, who's also a world record holder. But I had nothing here about who made the postcard or when it came out. And we want to show some sort of knowledge about the topic. And once again, so this was sort of the beginning part for me. The beginning part was, why did he call his cars Bluebird? And it was because he was infatuated with this book called The Bluebird, which ultimately ended up being made into movies. You've probably maybe even seen some of those movies. And so I just sort of talked a little bit about the history of The Bluebird. That was sort of the beginning of the story for me. Next slide. And then I went in sort of some sort of chronological order through why they picked Daytona Beach, and and how the cars changed over time, and then some of the world record breaking cars that had run there at Daytona Beach. So a little bit of the prehistory before the Campbells got to Daytona Beach. In the next slide. Now is when I started to exhibit some of the pieces that I had in my collection to begin with, were some of these old linen postcards that I thought were just gorgeous, and these painted postcards of him racing in Daytona. But one thing, once again, I didn't show knowledge by talking about who actually had printed them and all that stuff. But the cigarette cards, once again, I didn't mention who they were from. I'd also been collecting some of these old photo postcards, which I think are great. But once again, I just said it was a large postcard. So, you want to show a little bit more knowledge than just that. And this is an original, but you can see because I couldn't fit it on a regular page, I had to slide it like that. Next slide. I think this is just kind of more of the same, a little bit more about the history. This is something that maybe I mentioned earlier, where you might have actually had two items that to you are beautifully different, but to the judges they don't tell anything different in the story. So if I was to remount this, I'd probably take one of these away and put a different item. I'd probably just have two different caches. All right, next. A little bit more the same in this case. Some cigar bands that I found on the internet that were also celebrating that particular race. And then it was sort of getting to the point now where I was talking about, I was coming to the end and how he was, displaying his car at auto events around the country. Next slide. And then I sort of transitioned to his son. So his son had grown up around his dad, and when his dad retired from racing, his son took up the mantle and also named his class Bluebirds. And so I sort of talked a little bit more about his son's experiences. In the next slide, his son and the father actually both raced on land and on water, and so they broke the land speed record in the US, but they broke the water speed record in the UK at this particular lake. This is the postcard of that lake that's signed by the son. So that was a sort of a cool piece of that I had. And then I ended the exhibit. This is page 60 in the last one, just by talking about what's come since then. You know, so these two, father and son, inspired a whole host of British youth to take up world land speed record. And you know, so Richard Noble, you might have heard of Andy Green. These are ex-fighter pilots that basically drove fighter planes without wings, you know, to new world speed records. And so I just ended it with the current world speed record, which is faster than the speed of sound, actually, and then signed by the pilot of the car. So that was my beginning, middle, and end, as well as some of the flaws that led me not to score as well. And in the last slide, I'm just going to say, good luck. This is my second exhibit. I did it on a slightly different topic, and next week we'll have the shows on my debut. It's trying to grow, trying to get people interested in this. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Nice job.
Yeah, I love the idea of getting the critique back, because then you can tweak it for the next time around.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought somehow with judging, I just never thought you'd actually get the critique with it. They're just like, yeah, no, this is your points, go away. That's actually really cool.
You get a written critique and a verbal critique if you ask them. Plus, you can ask the judge to come to your poster, to your presentation, and give you more pointers if you wish.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so they really want to help people get better.
Yeah, they're setting you up for success.
Society, they get to judge.
No, oh yes, to get the prejudge, you have to be a member. But you know, like I said, it's not very expensive. But it's well worth it. I mean, you know, for me, I don't get into the nitty-gritty of how am I going to get from a small goal to a large goal. It's like, for me, it's more about, you know, things like this, helping you decide on what type of exhibit you want to put together. Is it going to be a topical? Is it going to be a display? Is it going to be a thematic? And they lay out some of the reasons why they're not one or the other. So for me, it's a more broader question than getting into the nitty-gritty about why the judges took off 2 points or something like that.
That's really cool.
All right, yeah, I mean, and I'd be happy to give you guys copies of this if you wish to see it. If you want to know what all these items that I've purchased to get started, I'd be happy to send you that slide, and you can find them in the All right, thanks.
Do we have any questions online? I'm thinking no.
Yeah, we're looking at the chat. There was some chat questions.
No questions. I thought that was awesome, though. Thank you for sharing.
There's no questions in the chat.
Oh, okay.
I got it up on here. James, who are